Hello, I just wanted to go through a few settings that I think are valuable when you're opening up a scene and you want to animate some things that can make your life a little bit simpler and easier. And especially if you're new to Maya, these are great to kind of double check and make sure that you're off to a good start when you're animating. Now, the settings I'll be showing you, of course, apply to animation. There could be settings here that are not very good if you're modeling or doing other parts of the pipeline. But for animation, the first thing that I want to be able to do is when I drag select my rig, you can see that what's happening is I'm not just selecting the control curves for my asset, I'm also grabbing geometry. And up at the top here, you can see it might be hidden, but if you go up and have a look at the snapping icons, and just to the left is a little slice you can open up there that shows the filters. By default, everything in your scene can be selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn everything off except for curves. And that way, when I select, the only things I'm selecting are what I'm supposed to key as an animator. So that means just the NURBS control keys. So I can animate and move my character and rotate and not have to worry about accidentally selecting things I'm not supposed to key. Now, of course, what you can do also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to say new shelf. And I'll just call this and then shelf. And what I can do is once I've set the filters the way that I like, then I can save that to the shelf here. So the next time I open up Maya, and it will start with all the filters on by default, there, then all I have to do is just click that button and it's set to just using the curves. And of course, you could customize whatever filter settings work for whatever you're working on in your scene in Maya. All right. So that helps. Now, of course, under the show menu, there's also a bunch of things that I could probably turn off if I'm not interested. So I'll turn everything off. And obviously as an animator, I want curves because that's going to give me the interface. In terms of geo, what I'd probably want for sure is polygons, but sometimes with rigs, they might be using NURBS services as well. I'm probably going to be using cameras and image planes. And then, of course, if I want to use anything like motion trails, then I could go and toggle those on as well. But for the most part, I'm just going to turn everything off. Even the grid, in this example, I don't need it, so I could turn that off. And then I'm all set in terms of what it is that I want to see and when I want to animate. So it's less clutter and I sort of streamline everything. The other thing that I can do is, it's a good idea to double check what the frame rate is. So it's set to 24 FPS, but what is the playback speed? So if I right click here on the timeline, I can go to the playback speed and make sure it's set to real time. So let me just show how this can affect your scene. So I'm just going to start by setting an extreme here, hitting S, and then I'll go to frame 25. Let's just do 1 second here. And then in the middle, let's just flip this to the other direction. So we got sort of minus 45 and plus 45. And if I just hit play, I can see things are working pretty well, just going back and forth. But sometimes when you open up Maya for the first time, the playback might be set to play every frame free. And then if I hit play, you can see it's going through as fast as it can. So if I want it to be in real time, I just have to go here and make sure it's set to real time. Now, of course, with a light scene like this, you should be able to get pretty decent playback, almost real time. If you want to check what the frame rate is, then what you can do is you can go under display, heads up display, and you can turn on the frame rate. And then it will display the current frame rate that it's able to get through. And you can see there it's going at 24. If I turn that off and I right click and say play every frame free, and you can see the frame rate's going pretty crazy. Now, obviously, if you have a scene that's very heavy and you set your playback speed to real time, if the scene is too heavy that Maya can't keep up and display every frame at 24 frames per second, it will drop frames and it'll get choppy. So for scenes that are incredibly heavy, that's why it's nice to also have the setting where you can say play every frame max, because if the scene is so slow, it's never going to play back in real time. Then, of course, you can at least see it go to chunk through every frame clearly. So you can see every frame, but you just won't be going at 24. You're probably going at a rate much less than that. So that's real time. Okay. Another setting that I like to use for animation is Autokey. Not everybody likes it, but with Autokey on, what that means is that when you change something that's already been keyed, you can see I've got red tick marks here in my timeline, it's already been keyed. If I make a change, it will automatically key just that attribute, what I had changed. So let's look at this attribute here. We have a few more channels we can play with. So this curve has not been keyed at all. So I'll start on frame 1 and hit S. Then I'll go to another frame. And if I hit S, you'll see that it keys, right? So it'll key everything. Everything's keyed. But if I just move over here and then I slide it up, you can see that it only keys what you change. So that's what Autokey does. By default, it will only key what you changed. It does not key rotate Z or translate Z, or rotate X. It only keyed what I changed. So that's what Autokey does. Let me just right-click, double-click, and delete all those keys. Right beside the Autokey button is the animation preferences. The animation preferences, one thing that you might like, depending on your monitor resolution and how old your eyes are, like myself. I've been animating for a while, and sometimes these really tiny little tick marks are very hard to see or distinguish from one another. So you can change the key tick size. So I'll set mine to 5 here. Now they're much thicker and they're much easier to see. So if you are sort of stuck with a screen, a laptop particularly has troublesome with that small screen space, and the sort of readability is really difficult. You can try boosting this up so you can see things a little more clearly. You can also see in this little tab here that playback speed, again, making sure it's set to 24 FPS. The other view that you might want to adjust here is update view. The default is it's usually just one view at a time. But if you set it to all, then it will update every view that you have in your workspace. So for example, if I went to a 4-panel split now, and I grabbed the control and was updating it, you can see that all of the panels are updating. I'll go back to my camera view, and what I can do is I can tear this one off, and then I'll go back to a perspective view here. So in the perspective view, I can move around, and you can see that as I update one window, the other one updates as well. If I bring those settings back up, and I say just the active window, to save that, then you can see that sometimes what will happen is you won't be able to see an update depending on your windows. Right now, it's actually playing both. Let me just tear that off. Let's go to a 4-panel split and see. Yeah, it's still updating. So in older versions of Maya, if you had that set to just active, it would not update the other windows. So for whatever reason right now, it's working in mine, but normally what would happen is only one window at a time would update. So let's go to the camera view, maximize that, and now back to my workspace. Okay, so that's animation preferences for the time slider. If you want, you can also adjust some of the settings here in animation. So there's a little toggle there for Autokey. That's also quite useful if you want to use that there. If you want, you can change your tangent types. I usually just leave them alone unless there's a specific reason, but if you want, you can go and change your tangent types to be linear and stepped or auto tangent, whatever you prefer. The last thing that I like to go through, especially with my students at the beginning of an animation class when they're all new, is to just show some of the things you can do in terms of the way the manipulators are displayed. A lot of times the manipulator handles, again, are really, really thin. And if you want to be able to see the axes a little more clearly, especially on smaller screens, then you go to line size and crank that up a little bit so it's a bit easier for you to see. Remember also that you can scale up the manipulators by using the plus or minus keys on your keyboard. And that's a nice way to get a little more fidelity. So if I have a much bigger manipulator, then a little tug on my mouse or tablet pen gives me much finer control. And if I make this a lot smaller, then that same little movement causes a much bigger change. Just one thing to remember, you can make it so big that you don't realize it's outside your viewport. And it's very embarrassing to have to call the IT department just to find out that all you need to do is hit the minus sign and bring it back into sort of the realm of normal scalability. Same thing with the move manipulator. If I select something that can move, Again, plus and minus to make that manipulator larger or smaller depending on your needs. So that's just a few animation setup points I wanted to go through. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you recommend people should do right away if they're going to animate to make their lives a little bit easier. See you next time.